there were some other, more well-known candidates that had been floating and asking for the job. A senator, Joni Ernst, and a former senator, Tulsi Gabbard. This pick, I don't think anybody else saw coming.
Let's start with the Trump administration appointments. Elon Musk is in there, as we expected, as joint head of a new Department of Government Efficiency. He has been rewarded for his work on the Trump campaign, but of course both sides were at it. The Amazon tycoon Jeff Bezos personally intervened to spike the planned endorsement of Kamala Harris, for example. Does this mean we have an oligarch-style control of the US political system, not only accepted, but indeed encouraged? In a minute, we'll speak to Adrian Pabst. He's Professor of Political Economy. He lectures at the University of Kent and at the French University Sciences Po. He's the author of Post-Liberal Politics. But first, let's talk to Caitlin Doornbos, Washington, D.C.-based reporter for the New York Post. Caitlin, thank you for joining us. Not much surprise about Musk's appointment to the government. Do we know at all? Has he given any clues yet about what he will actually do? I saw him tweeting just recently saying, we don't need 420 government agencies. I'm going to cut it to 99.
Yeah, he's made a lot of pretty ambitious claims about what could come from this office. There's not a ton of clarity about what we're seeing from him. He's also teamed up with Vivek Ramaswamy, who over here also ran initially against Trump, but then became quite a fervent supporter of Trump as well. He's a billionaire and is big on cutting DEI programs, diversity initiatives, things like that. So I would expect to see that. Also, they're even talking about. We haven't seen one way or the other, but Trump had made pledges to cut the Department of Education entirely.
So no Department of Education at all, which would be a pretty
Right,
radical thing to do.
right. It would be very seriously radical. It's been around, for decades and decades. Handles our public systems federally. I don't exactly know what what indeed that will take
Well,
to make that happen, but it's certainly bold.
what about the machinery of government? Because often governments arrive and say we're going to appoint this person to clear this problem up, and in the end it just runs into the sand. The checks and balances of an existing establishment just stop it from happening. Can you do things quickly in the US system of government?
Well, the thing about those checks and balances, that is what is concerning people on the Democratic side, and is that there's not really going to be a lot of those checks and balances with the Republican House, Republican Senate, and the Republican White House. Trump will have a large powers to do what he wants to do at will. Granted, he only has 2 years to do that before the next elections in the House and Senate. So I don't know. He has the ambitions. If there's anyone who can make a change this fast in America, it would be Donald Trump. But the reality of the situation is just it's just hard to predict with Donald Trump.
Just with the other appointment, which has caught everyone's eye this morning, and is in a way much more astonishing than Musk or Ramaswamy. It's the appointment of Pete Hegseth, best known as a Fox News contributor, as Secretary of State for Defense, one of the most
Yeah.
powerful positions in the world, frankly. What are people saying about this?
It's out of left field for sure. Within my defense circles, no one saw this coming. There were some other, more well-known candidates that had been floating and asking for the job. A senator, Joni Ernst, and a former senator, Tulsi Gabbard. This pick, I don't think anybody else saw coming, but he does have a military background that should help inform him, even though that's something that we like to keep separate. Civilian control over the military. Yeah, with his Fox News hosting, I don't know. I guess he'll be good on camera.
I think we're about.
Hopefully he'll take some questions from us reporters.
I think we're all about to find out. Thank you very much, Caitlin Doornbos from the New York Post. Let's talk now to Adrian Pabst. He's Professor of Political Economy, lectures at the universities of Kent and in Paris at Sciences Po. Adrian, you've written in the past about the idea of plutocracy. Just tell us what plutocracy is and whether this style of government, and particularly the appointment of Musk and other billionaires, is an example of it.
So plutocracy is really sort of the rule of the rich, if you like, and how they essentially circumvent, other forms of political representation to sort of have direct influence on power. And it's an idea that, of course, goes back to antiquity, like most of our political ideas. And the ancients, Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, and many others warned us about plutocracy because it does undermine democracy. It does undermine this idea that power really does come from the people. And representation is the way to sort of link elites to the people. Now, whether the Trump administration is going to be one, dominated by plutocrats or not, we will have to see because it will depend on really two things. One is how does the system respond, as you've just discussed with your reporter? Checks and balances, and elections come, in the US thick and fast every 2 years, so there isn't a lot of time to do things in between elections and indeed campaigning for those elections. But the other, I think, more fundamental tension in the Trump administration is going to be between the likes of J.D. Vance, the vice president-elect, who has a kind of pro-worker, pro-union agenda, at least in rhetoric. And we'll have to see how that pans out in terms of action and policy on the one hand, and the likes of Elon Musk on the other hand, who are famous for not really caring that much about workers and certainly not taking liking to unions and being much more about small government, slashing spending and deregulation. So, what is it going to be? Is it going to be a complete contradiction, or might we see capitalism in one country, protective walls, protective sort of protectionism and tariffs all around the US, and then inside a more sort of unfettered capitalism? And I think that's going to be one of the questions for the administration.
Does the US government have a history of this kind of plutocratic rule where whoever was president or whichever party was in power would appoint its largest donors, largest financial supporters to positions of power?
So I'm not sure that we've ever had appointments to positions of power. What we've clearly had is, for some time in the history of the US and indeed of other countries, a very visible public and indeed political influence of wealthy people. So if we think back in America, to the 19th century, likes of Andrew Mellon, the Ford dynasty and others, clearly playing a role in US politics. I think there was a difference though, and again, the same goes for the Victorian age in the UK, which is that a lot of these very wealthy business tycoons, captains of industry, they did have influence, but they also gave something to the country. They endowed, whether it's colleges or public parks or libraries, or so there was a sort of sense of which it's a give and take. They did very well from the industry and from business and benefited from government decisions, but they certainly returned something to society. The big question is, what will the plutocrats of the 21st century give back to US society and indeed to others? And that, I think, far less clear today.
There is perhaps one difference. It doesn't quite answer the definition of plutocracy in the sense that some of the appointments just seem like people who are friends or fellow travellers with Trump. We have this guy, Pete Hegseth, unbelievably almost appointed as defense secretary. The new US special envoy to the Middle East is Steve Witkoff, who's a lawyer and a real estate investor in New York. They're not known for buying their way to power. They just happen to be, well, in Witkoff's example, someone who played golf with Trump.
So I think that the other currency besides sheer financial wealth is the currency of loyalty. And the first Trump administration was, of course, as we know, riven with divisions and lots of fallouts, and people were in post for very, very short periods. I think the shortest appointment was 3 or 4 days or something, one of the press secretaries. So, I think Trump values loyalty above all else. And I think that's the other currency besides US dollars that explains some of that. Again, the dynamic really, really interesting here. Is there some sort of project here that can drive forward an agenda Or is it going to be all sorts of tensions that, again, ends up being, lots of conflict, contradiction, and fallout?
Chaos may be the way forward. Thank you very much, Adrian Pabst, professor, of political economy there.